Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The American-Iranian talks under Omani auspices have entered their third week. The stakes are high. During Obama's time in office, there was a sense of urgency due to the understanding that if diplomacy fails, Israel will probably attack the Iranian nuclear facilities, but there was no deadline. Also, other parties joined the United States after the secret phase of the talks in Oman. Now, however, the talks are bilateral, without their Europeans, Russians, or Chinese counterparts in the room, but there is also a deadline of several weeks, though it can, of course, be extended. The Iranians probably assess that President Donald Trump is serious in both his preference for negotiating an agreement and his determination to use military force to block a dash toward a warhead if diplomacy fails. Is there a formula which can satisfy both sides and help avoid a strike by either the United States or Israel or both? Joining us to discuss it are Dr. Amnon Sofrin, a brigadier general who formerly served as the chief of intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israel Air Force commander, and a helicopter fighter pilot. And last but not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, the nuclear file has been long on our various panels, but also a topic of much challenges within broader perspective, but also on regional terms. Set the stage for us.
Jonathan, you must have a hidden agenda by bringing here the representatives of Mossad and military intelligence, the Air Force, and the cyber staff, because these seem to be most of the elements which will be essential should Israel, with or without, but probably with the blessing of President Trump, strike Iran. But this is not for our show today. Now, what we have between the delegation headed by Special Envoy Wittkop and Foreign Minister Arakchi is a sort of a silent movie. All we have is the soundtrack. We don't know what has transpired between the interlocutors. We know that they came out, spoke about how positive and productive it was, and they meet again, both directly and indirectly. They managed to square that circle. But we don't really know what happened in the room or in the rooms in Oman and in the Omani embassy at Rome. So for the time being, the good news is that the talks have not broken off. It's not like the Ukrainian-Russian mediation track which President Trump tried to launch. Here, it's going on and remains to be seen whether Khamenei and Trump, not their representatives, whether they can reach a meeting of the minds. There is a positive indication, and that is that for Khamenei, regime survival is uppermost. The nuclear file, of course, is the means, but the end is regime survival. And for President Trump, the avoidance of war and perhaps a Nobel Peace Prize are more important, even though he has committed to stop Iran and perhaps roll back its nuclear project.
No, I don't know about a Nobel Peace Prize, since the Norwegian committee on this will likely not vote for Trump, considering the fact that it didn't do so after the Abraham Accords, which was the most impressive peace deal, at least in recent years. But nonetheless, when we're talking about avoiding war, naturally, President Donald Trump has not shied away from stating so openly and overtly. And at the same time, there are concerns when we're talking about Iran's nuclear program. We're seeing a reality where, despite not knowing, as Mr. Oren says accurately, the contents of the discussion, we do know one thing for a fact, and that is the tactical teams of both the United States and Iran are meeting, which indicates that they have entered into a new phase of talks, and they are also talking about some type of an understanding which goes within the 3.67% enriched uranium, which Steve Witkoff, President Trump's chief negotiator, alluded to already previously, which also puts off the table the fact that the Iranians cannot have a nuclear program altogether. And that is something that Israel is quite concerned by, since this would mean, if we're talking from a historic perspective, in 2008, the Chinese have reached an understanding with the International Atomic Energy Agency, with the Europeans and the Americans, to achieve a sort of a political agreement with regard to Iran's nuclear program, which based all of the monitoring and scrutiny imposed on the Iranians on Iranian data provided to the international community, meaning that we need to trust the Iranian word to be able to frustrate their quest of a nuclear program. Is that also the case this time?
When you look at this scenario, you have three main actors. The first one is Israel, not by importance, but where Israel is. So first of all, Israel.
Relevance. Right.
First of all, Israel. Israel is aiming to the fact that Iran will be dismantled totally, just like Libya, to demolish all the nuclear facilities in Iran and not to enable them even to have nuclear program for civilian use. To that extent. That's the Israeli position. On the other hand, the Iranians, let's say at what we call the starting point of their position is, first of all, to allow us to enable, since we signed the NPT, we're entitled to have nuclear program for civilian use, meaning to the enrichment of up to the level of 3.67%. The second issue, are not discussing anything about ballistic missiles, and we're not discussing about our proxies. Since we don't have any proxies, each one is entitled to have his own agenda. We just assist them somehow, but they're not proxies, so we don't deal with that as well. So it leaves only a square of the nuclear program. Now the Iranians are claiming it's only for civilian use. We don't need it. We don't intend to have what we call an atomic bomb or atomic device. And therefore, please get off our backs and let us run our show according to what we signed. And you can inspect. The IAEA can come and inspect anytime it needs. If you give us 24 or 48 hours in advance an alert that you are going to come, and we will be prepared. I translate it as we can hide all the things we are doing without your permission, of course, because we are violating our agreements. And the third one is the US. The US is what we call now more tolerant to accept Iran having a nuclear civilian program without the atomic bomb. They don't speak about ballistic missiles. They don't speak about anything else. Focusing only on that.
Even though the opening act did include the ballistic missiles.
Yeah, but nevertheless, they, as I understand from what is being published, they don't speak about that. They don't treat that as well. It's the same importance like the nuclear program, which is the main focus. And they will settle down with that, the fact that, let's say, we're going back to 2015. It was an agreement that one side, under the control of, under the administration of Obama, President Obama, who wanted to get to some agreement before Israel bombs Iran and demolish all the facilities. And this is, I think, a similar case, or very similar.
Indeed. With that being said, there's still a couple of open probes by the International Atomic Energy Agency, to which the Iranians have time and again responded to a number of queries which were relayed by this UN watchdog. Time and again, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi came out and defined the responses by the Iranians as credible, as technically not credible, meaning they're lying. Can somebody trust the Iranians after lying time and again over open-ended questions with regard to nuclear activities that were conducted in undeclared sites and have yet to be fully disclosed or disclosed at all, for that matter?
A JCPOA 2.0 is Israel's nightmare, basically. It's very counterproductive to how Israel views stability in the long term. I think the Iranians have proved that they should not be believed. By way of deception is how they work, how they operate, and any mechanism JCPOA style is just doomed. It's just kicking the can down the road. It's just counterproductive. And I want to say, very carefully, even though I think that the Trump administration really needs and wants a win, I think that the pieces that are in place right now tell me a little different story. I think that using credible force in Yemen by the U.S. administration immediately when the administration stepped in shows me a little bit different how things might work if the Iranians step out. And I think that the USA has a few options still on the table. I think that we might see some kind of step in between, meaning that the negotiations will go south for whatever reason. The Trump administration will want it to go south because the Iranians will give them a reason. I'm sure about that because they'll try to avoid and pull towards a JCPOA 2.0. And somehow someone will unleash one of two, either US forces, but I think Israel. And that is very useful for the United States to have a credible stick, both its own and Israel, to prove all or part of what will happen if Iran does not comply. I don't know if I'm speaking sort of hopeful. This is my hopeful thinking. But from what I'm seeing play out, I think that is the strategy. And what we're seeing, if we go even higher, on a higher level, I think this is one of the most quite amazing coercive campaign playbook being played out fully. Credible force, use of force on a different proxy, full power economic pressure, diplomatic timetable, the snapback in October, all these things are in place. And just the United States needs to play it out. And from how I'm seeing Witkoff speaking and the whole jargon, I hope we're not seeing a JCPOA 2.0. It will be a huge flop, I think, for President Trump. He won't be able to defend it in any way. That's my hunch.
Well, there are different forces within the Trump administration, which are not cohesive in essence. The libertarians are, of course, very potent in their approach, and it seems like they do have a vocal stance on not going after Iran's nuclear program. Nevertheless, President Trump has his own ideas and his own understandings of the various equations, and it seems like there are different voices coming out of the current administration, be it Mike Waltz and the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as opposed to other individuals within the administration, including J.D. Vance and others who are less inclined to frustrate Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But nonetheless, Mr. Oren, when we look right now plainly at Iran's nuclear program, We always say there are three legs to this program. The first one is being the enrichment. The second one is to do with the device itself, the payload, so to speak. And the third one, the delivery system. The Iranians already have plenty of delivery systems when we're talking about distances as far as Israel and Eastern Europe. When it comes to the United States, it is actively engaged in an ICBM type of program. Of course, it is masqueraded as a satellite program and space program, but nonetheless, the technology utilized for this is dual use, and therefore it can, in just a matter of several months to several years, produce those type of intercontinental ballistic missiles that could then deliver nuclear payloads and threaten the American homeland. Isn't that also a core concern within the Trump administration? And if so, why is the aspect of its ballistic missile program, namely of the Islamic Republic, not in the forefront of the discussions?
Well, one can think of several countries with such satellite delivery capabilities where only the third stage, once you replace it, can be a warhead rather than a satellite. There are several such nations in the world, India and others. Now, the homeland defense debate in the United States centers around the difference between forward deployment outside of the United States, as far away as Asia or Eastern Europe, against defending the borders and what is called NORTHCOM, the Northern Command, the lower 48 states, including the anti-missile program. But going back to the year 2000, there was a commission headed by Donald Rumsfeld before he became once again the Secretary of Defense, because he already served at the same capacity in the Ford administration, which warned that by the year 2000, the Iranians and others will have an ICBM capability. Here we are 25 years later. For whatever reason, they have not decided to go for it. Now,
They haven't decided, or was it frustrated?
They haven't, well...
because it seems like there was quite of hefty activities by various organizations, including one that our colleague here to our left represents, and it ultimately was quite potent in its capabilities to frustrate them.
But they could have bought it off the shelf, much the same way the Saudis bought
from China
surface to surface missiles from China, and Pakistan could have done it. Apparently, now you mentioned the Libyan model, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, sitting next to President Trump, also mentioned it. If you look at Libya now, the Haftar versus the anti-Haftar forces, this is not a vision which the Iranians would like to see in their own country. This is a non-starter. They are not going to do it. What can be achieved is going back to 2003 and the end of the Imad project, right after the American invasion of Iraq. And there was a fourth element to the three that you mentioned, the very decision, which up to now the US intelligence community insists has not been made by Khamenei, to go for the action. And in a year or so, not several weeks is enrichment. Now, when the New York Times broke the story last week of the American refusal to allow Israel to attack Iran, it said that the Israeli goal was only to set back the program for a year. The Israeli strike would not have eliminated, according to the New York Times, the Iranian project altogether, but only set it back for a year, which means that they could have reconstituted it, perhaps with Chinese or Russian help. This was not an ambitious enough goal.
Presumably so, and I hear different assessments by different individuals, that also some that have a direct hand in those deliberations. But one of the things that I will mention, why the Libya consequences of the fact that the Libyans left their nuclear program was the root cause for their demise. I can't agree to such an equation, since the foundation of such an argument is based on the fact that the Iranians will not forego their nuclear weapons program, irrespective of what we're going to do. And therefore, if that's the case, the Iranians should make the equation of what's the alternative and whether or not this would ultimately lead to the demise of their own regime, which is their core principle of the entire discussion. But let's focus now on what should be done. Since we have 6 minutes, General Sofrin, when we're talking concretely about the necessity to frustrate Iran's nuclear program, there's the diplomatic track and there's the kinetic track. The outcome should be the same outcome. That's how I see it. What needs to be done in order to bring the counter forces to the Islamic Republic into a position that would realize that conclusion?
I think that the Iranians understand perfectly the position. They understand, first of all, that Israel has a full ambition to attack Iran and to demolish all the nuclear facilities. They understand that the Americans are not threatening in vain. They gathered enough power in the Middle East and in Diego Garcia that can be applied to Iran immediately, if needed.
And they haven't stopped.
No, they haven't stopped. And to attack everything that can be attacked. Okay? Now, regarding that, the Iranians now, and they know they are vulnerable, and they know they are weakened. They have two options. The first one is to say, or to drag time of the negotiations and to get to some, to exhaust the other side that is dealing with them and to get to a better equation at the end of these discussions. And the second one is to say, okay, we give up, but as I did on 2003, I said, okay, we stop our facilities, our enrichment and everything else, but we want to maintain the facilities, we want to maintain the centrifuge, we want to maintain the conversion facility as it is. We can block one more time the heavy water reactor in Arak, like we did before on 2015, but allow us, please, only to have for civilian use. 3.67, and this calls for what we call a mechanism of better inspection that right now, not only by the UN and not only by the inspectors or the watchdogs, but the Americans in deep involvement, coming and over and over again and inspecting everything. Not just what the Iranians want to present to them.
Including military installations, which was not the case prior to...
Correct. If not, we're going back to the same equation that we had in 2015. Nothing will change.
General Rosen, naturally, a kinetic strike alone from the air is not enough in this calculus. And there are plenty of things in Israel's arsenal and the American arsenal, including various strategic bombers that are placed in Diego Garcia, in Qatar, and elsewhere, ready to engage with a time on target that is far shorter than if they had to do so from Alaska or from the UK, for that matter. But nonetheless, in this context, within the 2 minutes that we have left for today's program, how should this stick be prepared for a reality in which the Iranians say no?
I think the biggest risk right now is the Iranians dash to some kind of nuclear experiment. So crossing the threshold. And that immediately puts them in a different place. If that is the biggest risk, not a delivery, but showing that they have a nuclear capacity of whatever, dirty, stupid, whatever, that is the biggest risk we need to deal with. Having said that, I think that whatever strike, even if the assessment that Israel's strike will push it back only for a year, that is a classic example of good enough. It's good enough. In a year, it's not that they will have time to reestablish the program. So many things can happen in a year. The pressure can build up. There can be a next phase. If it's only Israel, the next phase can be the United States. So what I think is bottom line is I think the Iranians understand that what they are confronting right now is a very credible threat. I think that they are now in between of thinking, is it the regime being threatened? If that is what they feel right now, I think they might make one mistake, Israel unleashed, and then another negotiations phase.
Half a sentence.
We have to learn from history. In 1991, we bombed the atomic reactor, or the reactor in Baghdad, Iraq. Now, the Iraqis didn't give up their ambition. They went into another path of conversion and enrichment by centrifuge. And they were very well advanced when the Americans invaded Iraq. Therefore, we have to be very careful because the Iranians built two paths at least. One by reactor and the second one by centrifuge. And if you hit one, the second one it can become optional. Okay, so we have to look at that and we have to beware not to be back on the same mistake.
As General Mark Kimmett said in one of our previous programs, if you decide to attack, make sure you finish the job. I think sums it up. This is all the time that we have for today. General Rosen, General Sofrin, and Mr. Oren, thank you so very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.